Everyone's time. Thanks, Jen. And we'll wait once Matthew comes on board. I know he's a big fan of yours, Andrew, so he'll be able to come up to speed quite quickly. So I'd like to welcome everyone to our first webinar. We have all been going around in circles with NZPIF trying to listen to the politicians. Peter and myself have both been to meet Barbara Edmonds and Chris Bishop, and we've also spoken with David Seymour now. So we've certainly tried our best to sort of inform them of where we're coming from, where our members are coming from, and what we need. And we know from Chris Bishop, he really wants to listen. But the part that we've been frustrated with is the tax deductibility by far and wide is punches above its weight in terms of what's putting rents up and what's hurting our tenants and what's hurting our trying to even manage our property. So that's been really hard for everyone. So that's why we've called on a couple of experts and Peter in our fields to see where they see it sitting and how to get some leverage out of either parties to get there. And just a sort of disclaimer, we're not telling you who to vote for here. We're just trying to get the lie of the land and in the property sort of space as far as election promises go. So it's an information session. So if I can, you're very delighted to have Andrew Nicol from Opus Partners, and we thank you very much, Andrew. Both Andrew and Ed are world famous in New Zealand as far as their podcasts and webinars go. So old hands at that, and also beautiful graphics. So we're really delighted to have those presented to us. So if you could launch into that, Andrew, that would be terrific. And I'll see if I can get hold of Matthew.
Cool. So just for anyone that doesn't know me, I'm the managing partner of a company called Opus Partners. So we basically do investment property coaching, and more often than not with our service, that's for new builds. So we haven't been as affected as a lot of you investors would be with the interest deductibility because of the government's exemption there. But my company's been around for 10 years, so we have got a lot of clients that bought new who are now considered to be old investors. So it's been pretty hard on them because they thought they were doing the right thing, buying a new build and putting more stock on the market, which was what the government was trying to incentivize, and then now feel like they're penalized. So as far as we go as a company, we don't have any political affiliation whatsoever, and as Sue just said, we'd never go as far as telling you how to vote, because there's so much more than just housing policy when it comes to how you choose to vote. But I'm going to give you all the facts because we did a webinar just last month on exactly this topic. So I'll take you through what the political parties have said that they're going to do. Can everyone see my screen okay? Just make sure that you can see that. Cool. And if anyone does want the full webinar, it's available on our website. So in terms of where the parties stand at the moment, we went out to all of the parties and asked them to give some commentary around what their intentions were. Some of them make it quite available. Some of them don't really make it that available at all and make it quite challenging to find. As far as interest deductibility, I think this is probably the number one thing that your investors want to know about, because this is the one that's hurting us the most at the moment, because I'm an investor as well, and the amount of interest that we're paying at the moment is really, really high. To then add a tax on top of that as if we're making a profit when we're probably not is kind of insult to injury as far as I'm concerned. So Labor want to stick with their policy. They want to continue to phase out. So we're in that phase out period for any property that you bought before the 27th of March 21 cutout. So that those properties will continue to have the phase out of the interest deductibility. Greens don't have any stated policy, so my suggestion was they probably just want to leave it as we've got it at the moment. Multi-party are the same. So basically anything on the left-hand side, you can expect it to carry on as we've got it at the moment. Now, where it gets quite interesting, National and ACT both want to repeal this tax. National want to phase it back in though. So that makes quite a big difference, because they're not going to just suddenly turn it off, which is what ACT propose. ACT want to have it in their first 100 days of being in government. They want to have it so that all of a sudden you can claim it back. National want to, starting next year, have the opposite and phase it back in. Now, Ed and I actually hosted at the Tauranga Property Investors Association maybe last month as well, and I asked the national spokesperson Tama, who was there, about this, because in my mind we need the benefit now, because interest rates are high now. So whilst this is better than nothing, it's not great in my opinion. So just to kind of put that into image format, if Labor stay in power, then you're still going to continue to get that phase out of the interest deductibility until you have zero deductibility on your mortgage. If National get in, it is going to be that they phase that back in over a number of years. So it is a difference, but it is going to take some time before you really feel the difference. In terms of Brightline and capital growth, so Labor's policy, they want to keep Brightline at 10 years, but they've specifically said they're not going to introduce a capital gains tax, which is interesting because I don't know what Peter thinks about this, but he's an old-time investor, so I'm sure we'll have an opinion about it. Properties in New Zealand, on average, are kept between 7 and 8 years. So even though it's not a capital gains tax, it's capturing the average person anyway. So I kind of feel like it is absolutely just a capital gains tax dressed up as something different. Greens have no stated policy. So again, we'd expect them to just kind of side with Labor, keeping the same. Māori, no stated policy either. So if, again, we get a Labor Green government, we're going to have Brightline as 10-year policy.
No, I didn't. They all went at the same time to the same information.
Yeah, and we're just getting you on here. Oh, there we go. Jan, can you just mute yourself just so we don't get any interruption there? As far as National go, they want to bring the Brightline back down to 2 years. And again, I asked Tama whether or not if someone purchased in the 5-year or the 10-year Brightline period, if they would go back and retrospect, if those people would still be locked in that 5 or 10 years. The answer is no. Their intention is that everyone will be 2 years. So that's great news if you're 3 years into owning a property and want to sell it because the interest deductibility doesn't work for you. ACT want to abolish the Brightline altogether. Frankly, I think that probably some of your minority parties tend to say pretty extreme things when they're kind of running for government, but I expect that will probably not happen. So our expectation is a two-year Brightline if we get a National Act government. As far as the new rental rules, so all the changes around the no stated cause terminations, for example. So Labor want to keep everything as they are. Labor spokesperson at the event that I spoke at said they've done everything that they want to do at this stage. Greens want to introduce a maximum rent control. So they want to have a 3% max rent increases. And what's really interesting is when I heard about this policy, I thought, well, you're going to have people that do something like move a tenant out and put someone else in and then increase it the 10% that the market's increased that year, for example. And again, this isn't because landlords are, all money grubbing, bastards that are just trying to be mean. It's because that's just the reality of it. And they're going to try and find to get ways around it. But Greens have actually put in a provision there that they are going to link that to what the previous tenants paid. I don't know how they're going to police that if you do things like renovations. And they want to have a rental warrant of fitness. Now, again, we've all got to be Healthy Homes compliant now. But with a Healthy Homes compliance, it kind of requires the tenant to dob the landlord in. With a rental warrant of fitness, same as your car, all of a sudden the onus is on you to prove every, let's say, 2 years that your property's fit for purpose. Māori Party have a really interesting one. They've got a vacant house tax. And that means if your property is sitting there vacant for, I think it's more than 90 days, they want to be able to generate a tax from that as well. National have said they want to bring back the no stated cause terminations. So if you want to exit a tenant, you don't have to provide a reason for that. And ACT want to reverse all of Labor's changes in the first 100 days. Again, I think that's probably an extreme. I don't think we'll see it go that far. I do think that if we get a National ACT government, you will see those no cause terminations reinstated. As far as the wealth tax, and again, for some of the older investors here that have got a lot of wealth tied up in property, but maybe not necessarily the income to reflect that, Labor have said that they don't want to introduce a wealth tax. Greens want to have a 2.5% wealth tax for anything above $2 million. The Māori Party have quite a full-on actually, sorry, just one other thing on the Greens. I was just reading before that I didn't know. The Greens also want to tax assets that are held in a trust. Now, they want to start that at any amount. So if you've got a house in a trust, they want to tax it at 1.5%, no minimum threshold. The Māori Party have a staggered wealth tax between 2 and 8%, starting at $2 million. So for $2 million and to 5, you pay 2%. From 5 to 10, it's 4%. And anything above $10 million, it's at 8%. So what that means is if you do have a lot of equity tied up in these properties, there can be some serious taxes that isn't linked to income. This is just because you own properties. National ACT both want no wealth tax. Our prediction is if we get this change in government, you will see no wealth tax. And actually, to be fair, I think that probably is on both sides. Again, I don't think Labor will support a wealth tax. So just to kind of summarise what we kind of expect might happen, if we do get a Labor Greens Māori, I don't think you'll have no changes to the interest deductibility. You'll have the 10-year bright line remain. You'll have no new rental rules at this stage, and I don't think you will see a wealth tax. If we get a blue-yellow government, you will see interest deductibility phase back in, is our prediction. I don't think ACT will necessarily have the ability to get that past the goal. You'll see a 2-year bright line, the no stated cause terminations being brought back, and I don't think you'll see a wealth tax there either. So is that enough for what you want me to go into?
Yeah, that's terrific. I really appreciate that, Andrew. It's just quick to have that quick sum up. We're going to throw to Peter now so that he can. We're still waiting for Matthew to come online. He's trying from where he is, but because he's away on holiday. So yeah, Peter, if you can explain where you see this playing out for, particularly in the future, if it's phased out, that it's still going to cost the country.
Yes, the one question I have, of course, is if Winston, who now seems to be playing a part, appears to have made no comment about what his intentions are. Bear in mind that when New Zealand First was in partnership with Labor, and back in the government before this one, and Labor was wanting to bring in these changes to the RTA, which we actually advocated against. New Zealand First was reasonably supportive of us up until the death knock, where they basically voted with Labor to bring them all in what appeared to be a knock-for-knock agreement where they got the money they wanted for the Defence Force. So, yeah, New Zealand First was not our friends at that time. They sold us off in order to get what they wanted. And I suspect that some of the other smaller parties may well do the same thing. If they're in a position to do our trading, we could end up being the people who are traded out. The big drawback, of course, with all of this is the assumption that private landlords are bad and social housing and government housing is good. And I make the point, it's all very well to say we'll tax landlords, but when you tax any group of people, they don't sit still and take it. If you increase the tax on beer, some people drink less, some people drink cheaper beer, other people go and do home brew or drink soft drinks possibly. so they never quite get the money they expect from putting up a tax on things like beer. Similarly, I see lots of people, including someone very close to me, who have basically sold up their rental housing portfolio. And of course, a large number of those people then go on to the government housing rolls and end up in either a motel costing $1,000 a week for the taxpayer, or into a KOA or a house. And if you look at the figures for KO, they get $1.04 billion a year in income-related rent subsidies and end up making a several $100 million loss. So to actually get rid of private landlords is very expensive for taxpayers. So when a politician says to you, no, we can't get rid of this particular imposition on private landlords because we need the money, they are not looking at the full circle. What we claim, of course, is that tenants who are then lose their homes go onto the social housing register and end up costing the taxpayer far more than if they stay in a private rental. And I think that is one of the things that we need to emphasise when we're talking to politicians, that they need to look at the full picture of where the subsidies are and the cost to the taxpayer on the overall picture.
Thank you, Peter. That's a good summary, and that's where I don't think the message is getting through to the national government, that it's flawed thinking to think that they're keeping money in their back pocket when it's costing, in other ways far more. I'd like to welcome at this point Matthew Gilligan from Gilligan Rowan Associates. Thank you for joining us from your holiday destination.
That was so easy.
I know you're trying really hard, so I really appreciate that you've kept trying, because we're really keen to hear from you. We've had, while you've been trying to get on, we've had a really good summary from Andrew about where the parties are at. There is one missing, and I do see some people chatting about the Winston Peters factor, so we'll come back to that. But what we'd really love to hear from you, Matthew, is your summary. You're very in touch with, I know, particularly National and ACT politicians, but yeah, it's been a lot of discussions going on in the background with them, I know, from you. So interested in what your sort of summary of where you see it heading.
I haven't had the benefit of listening to others' presentations, but I think that ACT and National are completely aligned. While ACT are saying that they will repeal interest non-deduction rules, at the end of the day, they don't have the power, and they'll form coalition with National, and so it'll be what National's policy is. And so that is, there's going to be a phased out interest non-deduction period, which is what we're all interested in, isn't it? That's the thing that's burning us the most. So I think you pick your party, and it doesn't matter whether it's ACT or National. I know that Sue, you and I were having a lot of dialogue with David Seymour, and we were asking David Seymour if he would make it a mandatory coalition item in order to form a coalition that National would repeal interest on deduction on the 1st of April next year. So I privately discussed it with him, and you discussed it with him, and in short, he won't. But he's certainly more pro-investors in his rhetoric. I think you guys the other day, I think with ACT, he's dating us, but he doesn't want to marry us. He's leading us along. That's not to say that his policies are not pro-investor. Every aspect about what they have said is great. I think I've got my slides here. I'll just chuck them up. Give me half a think. I'm actually on the Gold Coast, and I just got the hotel, so I'm organised. But I know you will have invented slides that say this. I'm not going to go over them in any depth, but interest non-deduction rules, Labor and Greens, they love them. National are phasing them out. ACT will repeal. ACT don't get any choice, so it's what Nationals say. And we've asked ACT to put it on the line. They haven't. they're not willing to make it a coalition deal breaker. And why would they? There are other things at stake. So certainly at GRA, we love the ACT Party and how transparent they've been and how forthright they've been in supporting investors. They came through earlier, set their policy out earlier, and in every respect were easier to deal with. And in the National Party, I found a little bit duplicitous in that they said that they would repeal the interest on deduction rules and then it was switched to phasing it out. It's, it is what it is. I think National will prevail and ACT will follow along. They both parties say they need the revenue. Loss ring fencing, they're not pulling those rules out. So I think the politicians are all, there's cross-party support for keeping those. ACT have said that they should, David Seymour said to me that those rules should go, but it's not in his budget at the moment. Brightline, I don't think any investor would care about Brightline as an issue. It's interesting that all the parties think investors are concerned about Brightline, but at the end of the day, most of us are long-term investors. It's only people that sell that get caught by these rules. And I've tried to explain that to Chris Bishop and Paul Goldsmith and David Seymour on numerous occasions. I've said it to them. They're starting to get it. We are actually most of us long-term investors, so we don't end up paying Brightline. 10 years is too long, no question about that. But is it 2 years? Is it 5 years? I think there's a good balance from there. The capital gains tax and wealth taxes, Labor are gagging for it, but they know it's political suicide to say that they will do it. Greens are actually getting quite a bit of mileage promoting wealth taxes and seem to be rising in the polls, saying that we should tax rich people to achieve our social goals. So they're actually getting a lot of traction out of that. And luckily, National and ACT there. And then, as I'm sure Peter has said, the no stated reason termination will be reinstated. And I think that's an excellent result. We need that back. And the National Party and ACT have both said that they'll do that and end the automatic rollover of fixed to periodic residential tenancy agreements. So all that stuff is coming from these parties, and horse, is it ACT, is it National? They're both going to be great for investors, and what you see is what you get. That's what they're saying they're going to do, and I believe them.
Matt, I've got a question for you. Do you think, obviously, if they shorten the Brightline to 2 years, and then all of a sudden, as an investor, I think, you know what, I've got these rental properties with a whole lot of equity in them. I'm going to move them into a look-through company or a different entity, and I'm going to stack the debt against that and pay down some of my personal debt again, like the good old days. Of course, there's not been any benefit over the last wee while. Do you think you'll see a bit of that so that people can then stack up that debt, and then, yes, they're getting 50% deduction, but it's 50% on a whole lot more debt?
Yeah, I mean, the flexibility of restructure from a tax planning perspective does get better if the Brightline rules have expired. It's good for accountants and lawyers. So, they get my vote.
The other question that I've sort of been thinking about is it's kind of interesting having this 2 year or this phase out period while interest rates are high, right? It's going to hurt the investor in the pocket today. So now if you shorten the Brightline to 2 years, and I as an investor have been sitting on properties I don't want to sell because I don't want to be caught out by Brightline. Now,
but it's prospective, right? It's prospective, so it's not going to be retrospective. So all those properties are sitting in your balance sheet. You can't touch those for 10 years or whatever the date of acquisition was.
No, that's not what National have said. So I interviewed one of the spokespeople the other day, and he said that they would make it for everything. Now, again, let's see when it comes out in policy. But if you have got something that then all of a sudden you can sell, I'd say there might be a bit of a stampede of, I'm going to get rid of some of the stock. All of a sudden now, the government's got a real problem with rental shortages, which I think is already brewing anyway.
I'll believe it when I see it. I mean, I've never seen tax policy brought in retrospectively. That's not how it comes in.
Interesting. Okay.
So where there is an error that's in the tax base, that's a mischief for not intended government policy, which is very rare. I can't think of an example. They'll make retrospective adjustments, but I'd be very surprised if they adjust these Brightline rules retrospectively. But I'll tell you what, next time I'm talking to Paul Goldsmith, which will be next week, I'll ask him.
Yeah, that's a great question. I know a lot of our members will want the answer to that, or may want the answer to that. So something we'll be asking afterwards, because that's called grandparenting, isn't it? The other question I had,
right. And grandparenting is what they do.
Yeah, Andrew, something I heard on one of your webinars today is, does that phase out? Do you think that will help that National are doing that deliberately to slow down the market that they know will rev up, or is that a good way to do it or not?
I think
they want the revenue.
They want the revenue, 100%. That's exactly the reason they're doing it.
But
they're
then,
milking us like cows.
as I commented before, they are losing because it's costing them more to house those tenants in government supplied housing. So they're actually losing more money by keeping it in.
And hey, I know Peter's interested in this, and many of our members also. The Winston Peters factors sort of come in at the last, and everyone's dreading that coalition. How do you see that playing out? Perhaps Matthew first, and then Andrew.
I don't think Peters will get 5%. I think he's populist. I think he's personally, I think he's a narcissist, and he doesn't do what he says he's going to do. Power, and then enjoys the limelight and does different things to what he says he's going to do. So, although I like a lot of his rhetoric, and he's very nationalistic and almost Trumpian in how he talks, and actually a lot of what he says resonates. He's really saying, "Let's go back to the good old days." But will he follow through? Will he have the power? No, he won't. I don't think he'll have the power. And if he doesn't get 5% and you voted for him, you've wasted your vote, because it gets pro rata apportioned against the parties that actually do win. So I personally, I would not vote for him. I would vote for somebody that is going to get 5%, so that you can be sure your vote counts, which would be ACT or National.
Okay, yeah, great. Andrew?
Yeah, I'm of the same opinion that I don't think he's got the staying power this time around. But if he does, I mean, I just think that he toes the line nowadays. He doesn't have enough sway to be able to make any meaningful difference this time around.
Yeah, he might get, if he gets 5%, great. I reckon he'll get 4.9 or something like that. He'll be right marginal. So it's a risk to vote for him, would you? It's so important that our votes count. There's so much damage being done, in my opinion, by this government, and I know that would resonate with most right-wing property investors. We've really got to make our vote count, and a lot of what he says is quite attractive, but it's a risk to vote for him, because if he gets 4.9, you wasted your vote. We really need National ACT in to lead this country.
So has anyone else out there got questions? I see one here from Joanna. Do we know if National will allow 50% deductibility for new purchases of existing houses?
So I asked that question.
After 2 years, I think that's,
I asked that question to the spokesperson, but again, I'm never confident, what a spokesperson says, but he said that basically the same would apply if you buy a property today, you get the 50%, and then it'd be phased in over time.
The devil will be in the detail, won't it?
Absolutely.
I mean, the politicians said that they would repeal, and when those interest on deduction rules came in, I was furious. If anybody was on my webinar, I had a limit of 1,000 people, like 2,000 people trying to get onto it. It's crazy. I was furious. I think it's the only webinar where I've thrown something in the webinar. I was furious because I just thought, because Robertson said in the 2020 election that he would bring in no new taxes. So he was just being cynical when he didn't bring in a new tax. He denied an existing deduction, which is as good as a backdoor capital gains tax. It's CGT and drag. And, it's just about 100 days before he swore to black and blue, he would not bring in a new tax. And I almost liked the first term Labor government. They weren't that radical. Sandra was quite an attractive read. I know lots of you were shooting me for saying that, but she was sort of all talk and didn't do anything crazy. And I think it was because Peters was there putting the handbrake on all of the crazy policy. Second term Labor, Peters stepped out, and all of the crazy left-wing radical stuff came through, including interest on deduction rules. But, all of the wider social policy that has happened in the last 3 years was because Peters was not there pulling the handbrake on it all. And Yeah, the interest non-deduction rule was just a stab in the back. And did Robertson lie? No, technically it's not a new tax, but it's as good as a backdoor capital gains tax. He spoke with forked tongue. Yep, and in the workshop I said, oh, in the election year I'll be quite political. And that's why we've been funding ACT and National, and we've been quite political. I've never been political before, I don't care, but I'm really angry about what they did. They basically lied to property people.
And I do think what you said at the start, so property investors have become the villain in the last 6 years. And
we're evil oligarchs, you know.
One of the questions that well, maybe Matthew is, but you know, you look at your property investor and they're just a mum and dad who realise that if they want to have a decent retirement, they've got to do something other than just their KiwiSaver and rely on the superannuation. I've got a lot of younger investors that just don't believe that the superannuation will even exist for them. So they want to take matters into their own hands. And I don't think, like watching some of Green's interviews, they don't understand that investors are topping up. Like my investors that I'll look at, they're often topping up more than the tenant is. So the tenant's paying less rent, paying less towards owning that property than the investor right now. And look, investors are making an informed decision about that, but then to villainize property investors as the bad guys, I just think, of course we should expect capital gains. Of course we should expect some money later on, because we're putting our house on the line a lot of the time, and we're putting our cash flow on the line now. So we deserve to be repaid from that. It's a business.
Yeah.
Well,
I certainly hear you with that, Andrew, and I think that everyone listening here, even if they have managed to get their heads above being just that mum and dad investor and stick with it, is applauding you for saying that, because, and it's come out in the research that Miriam has done in a Stuff article recently, and people should read that, because the average investor is not wealthy and they're working really hard for their retirement to not be a burden on the government.
The problem with that, of course, is that we then have the academics who say, well, obviously most property investors are making a loss, therefore their intention is to make a capital gain, and under the intention test, every investor should then pay tax on that capital gain. I mean, me personally, I make a profit out of my rentals. I'm not really interested in the capital gain. I'm in it totally for the income, but I'm being classed, and others are being classed in that envelope. So I think it's important that we do point out that not all of us are in it for the capital gain. Some of us are in it for the income.
And when does it end? You know, they've got no depreciation, loss of the ring fenced, no deduction for interest, 10-year bright line rules, and they're still not happy. They want wealth taxes. There's just no end to it. They're just envy taxes. And yeah, so you'll see in my slides, I don't look at any of the minor parties, and I never talk about Labour or Greens. What's the point? Like, there's just such a divide, and they're so uncommercial. 82% of the rental stock in New Zealand is private landlord, and this massive pressure is coming onto KO as you see an evacuation out of second-hand housing stock. And this massive pressure is coming. The government cannot afford it. There's like a $60 billion forward book to build. All of that's private sector. It was all in the private sector. The private sector was doing it, but this government didn't like the idea that landlords were getting wealthy, so they're trying to get them out of the business of building houses and tax them on their existing stock. And what they don't realise is that there's so much capital involved, the government can't afford it. So as they move that 82% needle back and push that into the Crown balance sheet, they're also finding that they're not very efficient at building the houses, and it's causing massive pressure on the government balance sheet as they build houses for 30, 40, 50% more than the private sector can build them for.
One of the podcasts that we did recently on the wealth tax was for an accountant client of ours who emailed in and said, I need you to check these numbers because it just seems absurd. And when I looked at the numbers, it was absurd. So if anyone wants that, it's on our website. But the guy is like a single dad. He's managed to buy 3 rental properties and he's got his own house. and he runs his accounting practice, and his plan is to eventually, live off the rental incomes. Now, what it worked out to be, if we forecast out in terms of the percentage of his actual income that he's going to have to pay in tax, right now it averages out to be about 25%. Based on the Greens wealth tax, which is the one he asked about, it would work out to be like in the 90s, 90% of his actual gross earnings has to go to the government. I think it was like 94%. It was obscene, not even enough for him to live on. And yes, you can defer some of that, so you can capitalize that on your house and pay it later. But how is that fair?
Why would you? Like the supply just crashes. So they want to centralize and control, and I think it's part of it.
The whole intention is to get rid of private landlords.
Yeah,
and
that's
that's
right.
Unfortunately, is a doctrinaire philosophy they have. And as you were just saying about 90% of income, they don't want the 90% of income. They want the guy to sell up those houses and not do what he is doing, because all rental housing should either be government housing or social housing, and there should be no private landlords on a philosophical basis.
Yeah, but I think that's backfired on them, and it's showing out now. And as you said earlier, Matthew, the Labor government, it didn't start off like that, but when they got the mandate and were just single-handedly running the country, they pulled in all of these things. They made their MPs get rid of houses, which means they've got no skin in the game. And when you go and tell them 100 people are applying for a 2-bedroom property, they're shocked. Because they have no idea what's going on at the ground floor and how much rents are going up. So it has backfired. But previous Labor governments weren't so bad, and so that's why we're having this conversation. I've got another quick question here, and I think it's something just to sort of reiterate how much leverage will ACT have over adjusting national policies. It's something you've been talking and thinking a lot about, I know, Matthew, and I'm interested in quickly in what Andrew has to say before we wrap up about that also.
Well, I think we'll have to see who holds the balance of power, won't we? If Peters is there and National can govern with Peters, then not that much power. But David's been heavily criticised. David Seymour's been heavily criticised for saying he won't form a formal coalition if he doesn't get some traction. And the media have been saying he's been overplaying his hand. So I think that actually does show a bit of backbone in Seymour, and might be a indicator of things to come, that he won't just let National walk over the top of him. And I've debated stuff with David, and on occasion disagreed with him quite strongly over stuff. He doesn't back down, and he's hard to argue with too. Like, when he's got something in his mind, that's it. And I've argued with him over foreign buyers being allowed to come in and buy everything in the market. I don't want that. I think we end up serfs in our own land. And so I quite like the foreign buyer restrictions. And he called me xenophobic, and he didn't really want to argue the logic. So he's quite dogmatic, and he's really strong. So I reckon he'll be a fierce adversary for National, and he might be harder than I think he's going to be.
Yeah, what's your thinking on that, Andrew?
It's definitely my opinion as well. I've only met him a couple of times, and I heard him speak at one of Matthew's events, and I kind of, nothing really inspired me about him to begin with, and then I heard him at Matthew's event, and then I spoke to him a couple of times since then, and he is very, very opinionated and firm on that. I do think he will stand his ground on some of these things, and so I don't think he's going to just be walked all over, and so he might push a few of these policies across. Probably in the first term there might not be a lot, but then maybe in the second term, that's when stuff starts to, he gets more traction. He proves himself a bit more. I do think he's the right person to be heading up ACT, and maybe as a deputy prime minister, because he's never going to be prime minister, but maybe as a deputy prime minister, he might make some serious change.
And he's further right than the Nats.
Absolutely.
And there's a lot of rhetoric going around that Bishop and Nicol Willis are progressive, and progressive means woke. And I don't know if that's true, but we get this feedback that the upper echelon of National is woke and has more empathy to, Labour light. I don't see that in Chris Bishop talking to him, but there is a bit of rhetoric around about that. So it's comforting that Seymour's there, because Seymour's definitely not. And I want to see this government pulled to the right. I want to undo what's happened in the last 3 years. I think it needs to happen. So if anybody's going to push for that, it's Seymour.
Yeah, I've been impressed when I've heard him speak. I hadn't taken much notice of him in the past, but he talks of his principles and that we should restore the tax on principle. It's good for tenants, and he gets that. Whereas you try to explain it to National, and they still aren't really listening. It doesn't feel to me. So
I feel National vote shopping, whereas Seymour's actually got policy. So yeah, the National is very commercial. What's going to buy us the most votes?
Yeah.
And they look at investors and think, well, investors have got no choice; they have to vote for us or act. So we don't have to give them too much. There's no other road to go down, right? So we're cornered, and so we don't have much power.
Yeah, and I think post-election, I know the Property Investors Federation, between our associations, we are keen to do more collaborative work with the government. I think we all have a different part of the puzzle and different perspectives on it. So it's great to have you on, Andrew and Matthew, in the same room with Peter and myself. And if there's any final questions on the chat here, we'll see what we've got here. Someone's saying cost of one private 800k house versus one government 800k house, set up costs and ongoing costs. That's not really a question, but yeah, it's who delivers value for money, and the public-private partnership is where National and any kind of national coalition needs to be working, and they need to be listening to us. I know they want pets and rentals, and that's something that's a problem to us, and the tenancy tribunal decision making has been a massive problem over the last year, particularly.
The tenancy tribunal needs to be deleted and started again. I mean, it's just they should rename it Renters United Extension or something. It's absurd.
Yes. So we want to start applying pressure on some of those. So I think we're going to wrap up there, but I want to thank you sincerely both. As I said, it's great to be in the same room with you and hear your thoughts, and we look forward to working with you on our advocacy next year, and let's see what happens, how it rolls out.
Yep.
Yeah.
Nice to see you all.
All right. Cheers, guys.
Nice
See you, Andrew. Both of you.